Greetings there, everybody. I want to welcome you here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. This is a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're doing a show that I do every second week. It's bi-weekly. It shares the stage with metal, which is also bi-weekly. And we're talking about exploring the prog universe, or progverse if you prefer. So today I've decided on a band who I have a fairly lengthy history with, but not a great history. So the band I'm choosing to do is going to be Gentle Giant, who I consider to be one of the most undersung bands in the history of rock, definitely in the history of progressive rock. They become one of my favorite bands. They've skyrocketed over the last 3 years. And they're up there in my top 25 now for sure. Probably will go much higher. May end up in my group, my group of 6, which I'm now just basically calling my favorite bands. They're going to make it there, I'm sure of it. They just have too many strong albums to basically go unnoticed. So for me, the history of Gentle Giant starts in about 1983, 84. I bought my first album by them because I wanted to try them out. It was an LP. I played it half a dozen times. I thought I didn't like it. I found it too different. And my trained ear told me that the vocals weren't that good and that the music wasn't that complex, and I just found the album murky as hell, and so I just didn't play it anymore. And you think that would have been it, because that's usually the way I was with bands. Once I didn't like them, I did never give them another chance. It took years to get to a point with that. But when I moved out, about 3 or 4 years I moved out, I was out someplace buying a bunch of CDs, and this album that I didn't like, I bought it again. So I bought the same album again by them. The album was Three Friends. And again, I didn't really like it too much, but every once in a while I would put it on, and it started to gain a little bit of traction with music. A couple of things about it I liked. So anyways, we're going to talk about Gentle Giant. But first we'll talk a little bit about their history. So Gentle Giant goes back to the mid-60s, I think. You've got the three Showman brothers, Phil, Ray, and Derek. Now, Phil is quite a bit older than the other two brothers, and he wasn't originally part of what they were doing. Ray and Derek were kind of doing their own thing, and then Phil decided, he was going to help them out and stuff, so he decided just to join in and be part of it because that was the easiest way to help out. So they started out first as a band called Howling Wolves, and then they were the Roadrunners, and then they eventually became Simon Dupuis and the Big Sound. Kind of a soulish pop band, I guess. A lot of soul to their music and stuff. They were pushed by their record label to move into this psychedelic era and to work on making hits. They didn't really want to do that, but with some reservations, they attempted to do this. The music was but a little bit too simplistic for them. They didn't have the best of musicians that work with. In many cases, they had to take over the drums and the guitar and the keyboards to make them better, because they were better musicians than the people that they were working with. Their father, of course, encouraged them into this field because he was also a musician, which is usually what happens when you have a member of the family who's a musician. It usually becomes second nature for the children, or at least one or two of the children, to kind of be interested in this type of thing. So at one point they decided, they released a single under the Moles, and some people thought this was the Beatles, but then Syd Barrett had come out and told them that no, it's not the Beatles, it's a band called Simon Dupuis and the Big Sound. So, but they didn't really like the type of music they were producing and decided they were going to create a different band altogether, something completely different from what they were. So they formed this band in 1970 and called it Gentle Giant. So it was, just about going to be a type of music that was not commercial sounding at all. They wanted to expand the boundaries of music by creating this totally different sound, which they did, I think. They succeeded in that, although I'm pretty sure at the time they didn't really see that. Anyways, they teamed up with a couple of guys from another band called Gary Green. He was guitar, mandolin, and you had Kerry Manier, who played the keyboards and synthesizers and vibraphone, and I think he actually plays cello too. I thought I could have swore I seen him playing cello somewhere. And Martin Smith, who was the drummer. So this band became Gentle Giant. And they had 3 singers at the beginning. So they had Derek, who did the more rocky kind of rhythm and bluesy stuff. And then you had Phil, did the more folky and jazzy stuff. And then you had Kerry Manier, who had a much more delicate voice than either of them. And he did more of this similar stuff that Phil did, but more chamber classic type music. And so, but he didn't do any of the live stuff because his voice wasn't up to it. Didn't have the strength to perform it. So Phil and Derek would take over doing his songs when it was live. And reportedly, they had Elton John try out for the band, but it was not a successful marriage, so it didn't work out. So anyways, so they created this fictional giant character that happened to stumble upon these musicians, and reminiscent of the kind of characters that you would find in Francois Robideau's type of stuff. And so they that's how this name came about. The music was very wide, very diverse. All 5 members, of course, were multi-instrumentalists. So some of the albums had as many as 46 different type of instruments being used on them. I don't think anybody's even close to that. And so, anyways, they released their first debut album, and it was called just Gentle Giant. And I happen to have 7 of the 11 Gentle Giant albums. Of course, you know that I'm going to try to get them all, but the one I'm looking for now is In a Glass House. That's the one I've done a review on it. I've had it in a series. Actually, I think it was in one of my Prog Battles series, and I like that album quite a bit. So then we have this album, which is their debut album. Pretty well known. I think this is the album, the face of the group that most people have come to recognize. It's a nice picture of all 6 of the members there. So, anyways, this is a good album. It's a very challenging effort for them. Very kind of folky, rocky, bluesy, classical, everything you can think. They throw it together, and they very complex, very kind of multi-instrumental, a lot of different sounds to it. The only problem with the album, and the band members have stated this, is that it was a little bit, the quality wasn't that great. It was a little murky. I find it a little bit murky myself, but it has that real early Gentle Giant kind of sound to it, which has a little bit of that murky sound to it. But I like the album quite a bit. It's a great album. Then they moved in 1971. They did their second album, which is this one, Acquiring the Taste. I don't know, all their albums are always on the side for some reason. There's a little bit of a weird cover. I don't want to tell you. This is what it looks like, really. But when you look at this picture, it brings up other connotations, which I will get into. This is a much more musically and instrumentally challenging album, much more sophisticated than the first one, although the first one was quite good as well. Very experimental. The band has said that they were experimenting a lot with a lot of different sounds and trying to figure out what direction they wanted to take in their music. At this point, they were a little bit on the directionless side. At this point, Martin Smith leaves the band over disagreements with Ray and Phil, probably over what he wanted them to do and what they wanted him to do. And he was replaced by Malcolm Mortimer at that point. Let's flip over so I can look at my notes here. The next album out is the one that I purchased, my first album, and then bought again as a CD and didn't necessarily like. And I know what you're saying. Does that not look the same as this? Well, yeah, it does, because it is the same. Although this one, I'm not really sure. It looks like, to me, when I look at it, it's the exact same picture, only the difference is that this guy's a little more blonde. Or if you like, green. It's a little green blonde, you know. So this is Three Friends. This is their first concept album as well. You've got three friends here. They children that grow up together, but they grow apart, which is normal, I guess. And they all get different kind of jobs in life, which makes them hard to relate to each other. The music really kind of shows the separation in an intricate styles for them as well. So you got this kind of hard rock and then a bluesy edge, so it really shows the difference. And there's a part that is very symphonic in a symphonic classical style. So they're kind of showing how they've all changed and they're not the same as they once were. Still, I've grown to like this album, and I've been revisiting it again since I've been doing this series. And a lot of the things that I had initially thought are erroneous, and my prejudice against the album has kind of gone out the window now, and I'm really starting to listen to it quite differently than I used to, and recognizing how really good it really is. So in March of '72, Malcolm Mortimer got injured in a motorcycle accident, and they replaced him with John Weathers as a fill-in to help them through until he got better. But he was taking too long to get better, so they just eventually decided to replace him altogether, and so that's what they did. He never rejoined the band, and so then John Weathers was the main drummer now. But John Weathers also is a multi-instrumentalist. So now all six members, he plays xylophone as well as, I think he plays guitar as well. So I think there's like 5 guys in the band who play guitar at this point. Really good. This is one of those albums where they play a ton of different instrumentations on it as well. 1972, they come out with this album. Now, I do not have the good copy. I've got the American copy here, Octopus in a Jar. I do like the other copy quite a bit. And you've got a nice little back here as well. So it's a jar, Octopus in a Jar. So very good album. I'm only just starting to get into it. I've only had it, I don't know, maybe half a dozen months, maybe not even that. And I've just begun to start listening to it. And I had the same, it's kind of a funny feeling, I had the same kind of backflash to it as I did with Three Friends. I didn't initially like it. But then I knew that if I forced myself to listen to it, I would grow to like it. And that's what's happening now. This is a much harder rocker, too. Probably their hardest rocking album of all of them, I think. They use R.D. Laing's poetry as part of some of the stuff that they do on this album. And so lots of heavy instrumentation as well. And they did tour with Black Sabbath, believe it or not. And it didn't work out all that well for them. Geez, there's a surprise, right? These guys are nothing like that music. They got booed off the stage. It was a difficult scenario for them, really hard. I don't know who would put those guys together in a marriage. It sounds ridiculous to me. At this point in time, Phil was having disagreements with his brothers over the direction of the music, and so he just decided that he was missing his family, and his family life was suffering as a result of touring all the time, so he decided to leave the band. So Derek took over the lead vocals of all of the songs that Phil had done, plus live he was doing all of the vocals at this point, with Minnear only doing the studio stuff still. So in 1973, they came out with the album I Do Not Own, which is the one I want to own, In a Glass House. You know, very complex, of course, another concept album. And it's, of course, In a Glass House is taken from that well-known phrase, people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. pretty obvious, but that's where it came from. It was never released in the U.S. However, it was big demand there. A lot of people bought it as an import. I mean, it's kind of strange that they never released it in the U.S., but the band didn't have the commercial kind of success that so many of these progressive rock bands had. The next album out, Power and the Glory, which is this one. I've really started to listen to this quite a bit. It's, I listened to it. Really strong album. Another kind of concept album. This one about power and corruption. If you can hear the storyline as you listen to it. This has 8 tracks on it. This particular album here that I have in front of you was remixed by none other than Steven Wilson. So really well. This is a really clear sounding album. I like it a lot. They did write a kind of the story is about musicians and how they're being corrupted and they wrote this kind of song called they wrote 3 songs actually, but the one song they brought in and the label actually released it. You've Got It, Lads. It was kind of the label asked them to write some radio friendly stuff, so they wrote this song and then they released it and they hated it and they pulled it off the charts and released, and it was never released again after that. But anyways, this is a very good and strong album by them. So now at this point you've had 6 solid, really strong albums by this band. To me, as good as anything anybody's done anywhere. Definitely right up there. Then you got Freehand, this one. This is another one of my favorite albums. So now you're at 7 of them. This one is it's a little bit more simplified. They've toned it down a bit, and they've polished the sound quite a bit on this album. And it's the one that makes the highest. I think this placed the highest of any of their albums, 50th on the album charts in the U.S. Pretty accessible, more popular with more fans. So overall, a really solid album for them commercially, which is not something that they've had a lot of. And it was recorded in 1976. Actually, the live version of Just the Same is recorded in 1976. But anyways, really solid album, one of my favorites. And we move on. The next album is Interview, which is currently in my playlist. So this one is yet another concept album. They've got a fair amount of them. It's about an interview, kind of a satire type of thing, with the band. So it's just different people interviewing them kind of thing. Realization that the music is and at this point in the album, they realized that music is just a business, and the group and at that point, the group itself begins to erode. So this is kind of the peak. At this point, they are now over the hump and kind of sliding downhill a bit here. Really, I think this is a good album. I don't think it quite up to the snuff of those other ones that we've done up till this point, but still a good one. The last 3 albums I do not own. The Missing Piece is the first of 2 albums that they put together to try and change their style to a more commercial poppy sound. Very simplistic, on side 1 anyways. Very simplistic, very kind of poppy sounding, trying to get that mainstream. And then the second album reverts more to their complex stuff that they've done in the past. This album, of course, didn't do commercially well, which was kind of hard for them to take, because at this point they're trying to be something they're not, and their new fan, there's no new fans, and their old fans are not sure what's going on here. So then they decide to do another one, Giant for a Day, released in 1980 or 1979. Sorry, very commercial album. No strings, just basic instruments, and it didn't succeed, and it doesn't actually even sound like Gentle Giant at all. There isn't anything about it that remotely reminds me of Gentle Giant, except for maybe the vocals a bit. Just a really bad idea. What they've really proved here is that some bands, Genesis, Yes, and even Rush to a point, can go commercial sounding and are able to make that transition and still be successful, where other bands can't do it, and Gentle Giant just never was able to make that transition. Hence the reason why their final album, which is Civilian, had a really strong new wave sound to it, shorter tracks, but ironically a little bit more in the traditional sound. Like, it sounded more like the older Gentle Giant, but very short tracks. I know that the band were disappointed in their last effort, and their last couple of efforts probably wish they didn't. They had different takes on it. Some of them thought that the band ended when it was supposed to end because it had reached the end of its kind of creative parts to their music. This isn't shared by everybody in the band, though. Gary Green has come out to say that he thought they could have, if they'd stayed within what they were good at doing, maybe they never would have been as big as Yes or ELP or Genesis or any of them, but they still would have made a good living doing stuff that was really good and well received by a select amount of. They're a bit of a cult band like Rush. They have a cult following, not as big as Rush's, but they wanted that, and I think Derek wanted that, and they just never got it. So the band disbanded, and from that point on, they've had little incarnations of guys from the band getting back together and playing with each other, but they never called it Gentle Giant, and they're one of the few bands that never actually went back once they disbanded. For better or worse, that's the way it is. I would love to see them. They're one of the few bands out there. If they got back together, I would go see them. And I'm not a concert goer, as many of you know, but I would go see them because they are just so damn good. Such a great band. Most of the members went on to do stuff in music, careers in music. And Ray recently died. For most of you who know that, died last year, which to me is such a loss. He's such a good musician, so good at that violin, and the bass is absolutely killer. And he's the youngest of the three, so the oldest brother has got to be close to 80 now, if he's not 80. He's probably in his 80s, actually. And the other guys have done little bits of stuff here and there, but I think Gary Green did some stuff with a few bands, and John Weathers has done stuff as a session musician with different bands and stuff, but they're all still around, except for now Ray is gone. But I don't really see it happening. The problem with this is that it's been so long now, and most of them have jobs doing other things, so it's very difficult for them to just drop those things and go to play a tour or something like that. I'm sure they would be absolutely received brilliantly, even if they weren't really instrumentally up to what they once were. And it's been 40 years, so I'm not sure that they would be, because they haven't practiced. They'd have to practice a lot. It's a lot involved to get something like this together. And it's just sad that it probably won't happen, because to me, they are as good as Yes, Genesis, Rush, ELP, King Crimson. They belong there with those bands. They just didn't get the kind of commercial success. And to be honest, I'm glad they didn't. I know that some of you will say, what do you mean? You want them to be successful? Yeah, I'd like to see them successful too, but usually success means changing your style of music to a commercial sound, and I just absolutely adore their music the way it is. I wouldn't want to see that part change. But that's how it goes sometimes. So anyways, there you have it. That's my take on Gentle Giant. I know I'm not the connoisseur of Gentle Giant. They're still, in 3 years now, I've been listening to them pretty regularly, and starting to read up on their history and learn about them and stuff like that. Great band. I think they're worth a lot of talking about. They deserve any attention they get. And if you got any stuff you want to add, please put it in the comments section below. Please hit the like and subscribe button. They're much appreciated. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the content. And of course, next week we'll be doing metal, and I'm almost 100% sure at this point in time that I'm going to be featuring a band called Whitesnake. But I'll be doing an episode of This Week tomorrow, which will be the first time I've done it in a month, and I'll know for sure by then whether that's going to be something that I'm going to do or not. So anyways, I've enjoyed doing this. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and I hope to see you next week on Metal. So take care and goodbye.